I am Renee, 29 years old, and a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud. I have spent my entire career unraveling complex financial lies, so I always believed I could spot a trap from a mile away. But as I sat at the dinner table with my wealthy future in-laws, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Do not react. They are recording. You look at the smoke detector above the centerpiece. I slowly lifted my gaze and spotted the microscopic blinking red dot hidden in the plastic grate. At the exact same moment, my screen illuminated with 33 missed calls from my firm chief information security officer. Tonight was not a welcome to the family dinner. It was a perfectly orchestrated ambush. The sharp clinking of crystal goblets pulled my attention back to the lavish private dining room of the country club. Vivian Caldwell, my future mother-in-law, sat at the head of the table radiating cold authority. She wore a tailored designer suit that probably cost more than my first car, and heavy diamond earrings that caught the chandelier light. Vivian slowly looked me up and down, her eyes resting on my modest silk blouse with obvious disdain. "Renee, dear," she purred loudly enough for the waiters to hear. "I see you are still shopping at those quaint little discount boutiques. I suppose when you are raised by a public school teacher, it is difficult to grasp the sartorial expectations of a family like ours. We really must get you a stylist before the wedding so you do not embarrass Trey in front of our board members." I kept my face perfectly still, forcing a polite smile. I was used to Vivian and her venomous little remarks. I usually swallowed my pride for the sake of Trey, my handsome, supposedly perfect fiancé. But Trey just sat there swirling his expensive Cabernet, looking everywhere except at me. He did not say a single word to defend me. Instead, his brother-in-law Spencer leaped into the conversation. Spencer was a 32-year-old white finance broker who had married Trey's sister Jasmine. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his heavy gold watch, and let out a condescending chuckle. "Take it easy on her, Vivian," Spencer said with a slick, arrogant grin. "Renee is just a forensic accountant. She spends her days buried in spreadsheets counting other people's pennies. She does not understand how real wealth is generated. You cannot expect a corporate drone to understand the mindset of top-tier investors like us." Jasmine flipped her flawless hair and glared at me. "Exactly," Jasmine chimed in. "You should be grateful we are even letting you sit at this table. Spencer just closed a massive hedge fund deal while you are probably stressing over your next utility bill." Normally, I would let them stroke their own egos, but the hidden camera above us changed everything. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to look unhinged or aggressive. I took a slow sip of sparkling water and met Spencer's gaze. "It is funny you mentioned top-tier investing, Spencer," I said, keeping my voice smooth and conversational. "My tedious little accounting job actually helped federal investigators freeze a massive crypto fund last week, after $4 million mysteriously vanished. I heard your brokerage firm was heavily tied to that exact fund. I certainly hope those missing millions do not affect your upcoming quarterly reports." The arrogant smirk instantly melted off Spencer's face, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. Jasmine opened her mouth to scream at me, but Harrison Caldwell, my future father-in-law, slammed his heavy hand against the mahogany table. The loud thud echoed through the private room. Harrison reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, tossing them directly in front of my plate. "This family protects its assets," Harrison barked, his voice thick with authority. "This is our standard prenuptial and credit authorization agreement. Sign it right now before we move forward with any wedding plans. We do not do blind trust in this family." Trey suddenly reached over and grabbed my hand. His palms were sweating. He looked at me with those deep brown eyes that I used to trust completely. "Just sign it quickly, baby," Trey whispered, his voice tight and urgent. "It is just a formality to keep my dad happy. Please do not make a scene." I looked down at the thick stack of paper. Thanks to years of auditing complex corporate mergers, I could speed-read legal jargon better than most attorneys. I flipped past the standard non-disclosure clauses and landed straight on page 4. My heart stopped. This was not a prenuptial agreement. It was an unconditional guarantor contract. If I signed that page, I would be legally binding my federal auditing license and my personal credit to a shell company called Apex Holdings. Apex Holdings was Spencer Company. If I put my signature on that dotted line, I would instantly become legally responsible for millions of dollars in hidden debt. They did not want me as a daughter-in-law. They wanted me as a human shield. Trey and his family had spent 3 entire years grooming me, playing the perfect upper-class family, just so they could use my spotless legal and financial credentials to save their crumbling empire. The blinking red light of the hidden camera stared down at me. They were recording this, trying to trap me into verbally agreeing to their financial crimes. My stomach twisted with pure disgust, but I refused to let them see me break. I looked at Trey, recognizing for the first time that the man I loved was nothing but a spineless coward, willing to sacrifice my entire life to save his own skin. Before I could say a word, my phone vibrated against my leg for the second time. I glanced down at the screen, keeping it hidden under the table edge. It was another message from the unknown number. Do not sign it. Spencer is completely bankrupt, and they are trying to dump a $15 million federal tax debt on you. I am Elias, the IT tech, and I am watching you from the server room in the basement. I took a deep breath, letting the reality of the situation wash over me. I was surrounded by predators, but they had just made a fatal mistake. They tried to outsmart a woman who dismantles financial criminals for a living. The silence at the table was heavy, but I did not break it. I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited. Spencer was the first to lose his patience. He let out a loud theatrical sigh and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table. He flashed that practiced salesman smile that he probably used to scam elderly investors out of their retirement funds. Listen, Renee, he began, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. You need to look at the bigger picture here. I know you are used to the public sector mentality. You sit in a cubicle all day looking at old spreadsheets and highlighting receipts. That is fine for someone with limited ambition. But we are talking about generational wealth here. We are talking about aggressive growth portfolios and high-yield offshore accounts. He paused to take a slow, arrogant sip of his bourbon, looking around the table to make sure Vivian and Harrison were admiring his business acumen. Jasmine was looking at him like he was a god. You forensic accountants are just historians, Spencer continued, waving his hand dismissively. You look at what happened yesterday. I look at what is going to happen tomorrow. I move capital. I create value out of thin air. You are just a glorified hall monitor trying to catch people who actually have the guts to take risks. So when Harrison puts a document in front of you, it is not a trap. It is an invitation to join the winning team. You should be thanking us instead of reading the fine print. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. The red light of the hidden camera was still blinking steadily above the floral arrangement. They desperately wanted me to lose my temper. They wanted a recording of me sounding crazy and ungrateful. Instead, I offered Spencer a warm, sweet smile. I appreciate the finance lesson, Spencer, I said, my voice soft and perfectly modulated. It is truly fascinating to hear how the winning team operates. But speaking of taking risks and creating value out of thin air, I was actually reading up on the latest market trends this morning. Have you seen the devastating news about the Helios Digital Asset Fund? Spencer froze. The smug smile vanished from his face so fast it was almost comical. The hand holding his bourbon glass gave a slight tremor. I tilted my head, feigning innocent curiosity. It is just terrible what happened to them, I continued smoothly. According to my colleagues at the Securities and Exchange Commission, they lost nearly 70% of their liquid assets in a span of 48 hours. Apparently, they were overleveraged in some very questionable offshore derivatives. It is a complete bloodbath. The dining room was dead silent. Harrison stopped cutting his steak. Vivian narrowed her eyes at me. The reason I bring it up, I said, taking a delicate bite of my asparagus, is because I noticed your brokerage firm was listed as one of their primary institutional backers. In fact, the public filings show that you funneled nearly $12 million of client money into that specific crypto fund just last month. I assume you managed to pull your capital out before the withdrawal freeze was enacted yesterday morning. Right, Spencer. Spencer opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. A bead of cold sweat formed on his forehead. He looked frantically at Harrison and then down at his empty plate. He was completely caught off guard. He had no idea that a public school teacher daughter would have access to real-time federal investigation data. Before Spencer could stammer out a lie, his wife Jasmine slammed her manicured hands onto the table. Her heavy diamond bracelets clattered loudly against the wood. "How dare you speak to my husband like that?" Jasmine shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You are just jealous, Renee. You have always been jealous of what we have. You sit in your cheap little apartment and count other people's money while we actually live the dream. Spencer is a genius. He buys me a new car every 6 months. We vacation in St. Bart's. You're just trying to make him look bad because you know you will never belong in our world." I did not flinch at her outburst. I just looked at her with genuine pity. Jasmine had grown up swimming in Caldwell money, but she had zero understanding of how quickly it could all disappear. She thought designer bags and luxury vacations were proof of wealth, but I knew the truth. Those things were just proof of spending. And right now Spencer was spending money that did not belong to him. Jasmine. "I am not trying to make your husband look bad," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level for the microphone hidden above us. "I am simply asking a relevant financial question, since your father is asking me to sign my name and bind my federal auditing license to your family businesses. If Spencer Firm is facing a massive liquidity crisis because of a failed crypto gamble, it would be highly unethical for me to sign a guarantor contract without full disclosure." Harrison's face turned purple with rage. He realized exactly what I was doing. I was using their own trap against them. I was casually entering their massive financial failures and potential federal crimes into their own secret audio recording. If they ever tried to use this tape against me, they would also be handing prosecutors a neat little package of their own financial admissions. "Enough!" Harrison bellowed, pointing a thick finger at me. "We are not discussing Spencer portfolio. We are discussing your commitment to this family. You are dodging the question, Renee. Are you going to sign the paper, or are you going to walk away from my son?" Trey looked at me with pleading eyes. "Please, Renee," he whispered. "Just do what they say. Do not ruin this for us." I looked at the man I had planned to marry. There was no love left in my heart for him. There was only a cold, sharp clarity. Harrison did not even wait for me to formulate a response to his sudden ultimatum. He reached down into his heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a massive, solidly bound legal document, tossing it directly onto the polished wood right next to my dinner plate. The heavy thud seemed to echo in the quiet private dining room, drowning out the soft, classical music playing from the overhead speakers. "Our family protects its assets," Harrison stated, his voice dropping an octave to assert his absolute patriarchal authority. "What you are looking at is the final prenuptial agreement. You need to sign this before you officially join us, Renee. We do not allow outsiders to marry into the Caldwell name without securing our financial legacy first." Trey slid his chair closer to mine, the legs scraping loudly against the expensive hardwood floor. He reached out and wrapped his warm hand over my cold fingers, giving me a fake, loving look that made my skin crawl. I stared at his perfectly manicured hand resting over mine. This was the hand that had slipped a diamond ring onto my finger 6 months ago under the twinkling lights of a Parisian balcony. He had told me I was the only woman who truly understood him. He had whispered that we would build an empire together away from his controlling parents. Now, looking at the desperate glint in his eyes, I realized that his romantic proposal was nothing more than a calculated business transaction. He had not been looking for a wife. He had been recruiting a corporate shield. "Please," Baby Trey murmured softly, his thumb rubbing circles on my skin. "It is just a standard contract. Everyone in our circle signs one. Just put your name on the dotted line so we can move past this and enjoy our dinner. We are going to have a beautiful life together, I promise." I looked down at the thick stack of premium legal paper. They were banking on the fact that most people are intimidated by dense legal jargon. They assumed I would just skim the first page, feel overwhelmed by the complex vocabulary, and sign at the bottom out of sheer social pressure, but they completely underestimated what I do for a living. I am a forensic accountant. I spend 60 hours a week hunting down hidden clauses buried in thousands of pages of corporate fraud. Reading complex weaponized contracts is my native language. I slowly pulled the document toward me, sliding my index finger down the first page. I ignored Trey squeezing my hand. I ignored Vivian tapping her manicured fingernails impatiently against her crystal wine glass. I ignored the microscopic red light of the hidden camera recording my every move from above the floral centerpiece. I focused entirely on the black ink printed on the page. The first 3 pages were exactly what Harrison claimed they were. They contained standard prenuptial clauses. Division of premarital assets, waiver of spousal support in the event of infidelity, and standard non-disclosure agreements regarding the Caldwell family businesses. It was all very textbook, very boring, and perfectly designed to lull someone into a false sense of security. But then I turned to page 4. The paper felt slightly different, almost as if it had been slipped into the binding at the very last minute. The header on page 4 did not mention a marriage. It did not mention divorce or personal assets. The bold text at the top read, "Unconditional commercial guarantor and indemnity agreement." My eyes darted across the dense paragraphs, absorbing the terrifying reality of what they were trying to do to me. This was not a prenup anymore. This was a death trap. According to the fine print, by signing this document, I was legally binding my personal credit, my future earnings, my retirement accounts, and my federal auditing license to a corporate entity named Apex Holdings. It explicitly stated that in the event of default, the guarantor, meaning me, would waive all rights to a trial and immediately surrender all liquid assets to cover the corporate deficit. I knew that name. Apex Holdings was the shell company Spencer had set up 3 years ago. It was the exact same company he used to funnel money into the doomed crypto fund we had just been discussing moments prior. If I signed this paper, I was not just agreeing to marry Trey. I was agreeing to become the sole financial casualty for Spencer failing business. If Apex Holdings defaulted on its massive debts, the creditors would not go after Spencer. They would not go after the wealthy Caldwell family. They would come directly after me. They would seize my bank accounts, garnish my wages, and destroy my professional reputation. I would be left completely bankrupt and facing potential federal charges while the Caldwells walked away without a single scratch. I briefly glanced up at the floral centerpiece. The hidden camera was still blinking steadily. They had set up this entire expensive dinner isolated in a private room equipped with surveillance just to pressure me into signing away my life. They needed video proof of me willingly flipping through the pages and signing the document so that when the federal investigators eventually came knocking, the Caldwell family could point the finger directly at me. They would claim I was the mastermind and I would have no defense. I kept my face entirely blank, but inside my mind was racing. How long had they been planning this? Was I chosen specifically because I was an orphan with no powerful family to protect me? I had a pristine credit score and a flawless federal license. I was the perfect naive fall guy. I flipped to the next page, deliberately taking my time reading every single word. Vivian let out a loud, exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes dramatically. "For heaven's sake, Renee," she snapped, her polite facade finally cracking. "It is standard boilerplate language. You do not need to read every single syllable. You are holding up the entire evening, and the chef is waiting to serve our main course." "I am simply being thorough, Vivian," I replied, my voice calm and steady. My mother always taught me never to sign anything I have not fully read, especially when it involves giving up my legal rights. Spencer leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. "There are no legal rights being given up," he scoffed, shaking his head. "It is a formality to integrate you into the family trust. Are you really going to sit here and insult Harrison by acting like we are trying to pull one over on you? We are handing you the keys to the kingdom, and you are complaining about the weight of the metal." I looked up from the document and met Spencer, pale, nervous eyes. "The keys to the kingdom," I repeated softly. or the anchor to a sinking ship. Tell me, Spencer, what exactly does Apex Holdings do? Because according to paragraph 7 subsection B, I am agreeing to assume liability for all existing and future debts incurred by this specific entity. That seems a bit unusual for a marriage contract, do you not think? The color instantly drained from Trey's face. His grip on my hand loosened, and he quickly pulled his arm back as if he had been burned. He looked across the table at his father, his facade of the loving fiancé completely shattering in real time. Harrison's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into dangerous little slits. "You are overstepping your boundaries," young Lady Harrison warned, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "You do not question the structure of our family enterprises. You are here to become a Caldwell. That means you fall in line and do what is necessary to protect the collective." "I am not a Caldwell yet," I shot back, leaning back in my chair. "And I find it very interesting that this document requires me to guarantee a company that Spencer manages, a company that is currently bleeding millions of dollars." Jasmine slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "Stop bringing up his company," she screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. "You are so paranoid and stupid. This is why nobody likes you. You are trying to ruin my husband's reputation because you are a miserable, lonely person." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had the facts, and the facts were damning. "Jasmine, I am not the one who buried a commercial liability clause inside a prenuptial agreement," I said calmly, my eyes locking onto hers. "I am simply reading the words your father printed on this page. If Spencer Company is as successful as you claim, why does it need my federal license to secure its debts? Why does a supposed millionaire need a public school teacher daughter to co-sign his loans?" No one had an answer. The silence that followed was deafening. The illusion of the perfect wealthy family was cracking wide open right in front of my eyes. They were not elite. They were desperate. They were drowning in debt and looking for a life raft to drag down with them. And they had chosen me. Vivian slammed her crystal wine glass onto the table with a sharp thud that made the silverware jump. She composed her face into a mask of aggressive maternal disappointment, smoothing out her expensive silk blouse. "You are being completely paranoid, Renee," Vivian said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are taking a generous gift and turning it into some ridiculous conspiracy theory. Apex Holdings is not a sinking ship. It is a highly lucrative entity that we are graciously offering you a stake in. We are trying to make you a shareholder, a true partner in the Caldwell empire. But clearly your working-class background has made you suspicious of real opportunity. You see a trap where we are offering you a throne." I did not take the bait. I simply tapped my manicured fingernail against the heavy parchment of page 4. "If this is a gift, Vivian," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "Why is the word shareholder entirely absent from this document? The legal term used here is unconditional guarantor. In corporate finance, that does not mean I get a share of the profits. It means I am solely legally liable for the losses. You are not offering me a throne. You are asking me to stand in front of a moving train so your son-in-law can walk away without a scratch." Harrison's face darkened with fury, but before he could launch into another authoritarian lecture, Trey abruptly let go of my hand. The soft, pleading look in his eyes vanished completely. It was replaced by a cold, hard stare that I had never seen in all our 3 years together. The man I had shared a bed with, the man who had promised to protect me, leaned in so close I could smell the expensive Cabernet on his breath. "Just sign the damn paper, Renee," Trey hissed through his teeth, his voice barely more than a vicious whisper. "Stop trying to act smarter than everyone else in the room. The company needs a fresh injection of capital, and we cannot secure a commercial loan without your clean federal auditing license to back the credit. You owe me this. Do not embarrass me in front of my family." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air in the private dining room suddenly felt impossibly thin. "You owe me this." I sat perfectly still, processing the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. My mind raced backward, sifting through 3 years of memories with the cold precision of a forensic audit. We met at a corporate charity gala. He had bumped into me, spilled champagne on my dress, and charmed me with his self-deprecating humor. He had asked so many questions about my job that night. He had been so fascinated by my security clearances and my spotless credit history. I thought he was interested in my mind. I thought he respected my career. It was all a lie. Every single moment of our relationship was a calculated long con. He did not bump into me by accident. He targeted me. His family was drowning under Spencer reckless financial gambling, and they needed a clean, untraceable asset to absorb the impact of their impending ruin. They looked at me, a woman with no wealthy parents to protect her, but with the exact federal credentials they needed, and they saw a perfect disposable mark. Trey had not spent the last 3 years loving me. He had spent the last 3 years grooming me for this exact moment at this exact table under that blinking hidden camera. I looked at Trey, really looked at him for the first time. The handsome, charming heir to the Caldwell real estate fortune was nothing but a hollow puppet. He was so terrified of losing his trust fund and his luxury lifestyle that he was willing to serve the woman he supposedly loved on a silver platter to federal creditors. I felt a sickening wave of nausea wash over me, but I forced it down. I could not afford to be emotional. Not here. Not while they were recording every breath I took. So that is what this is, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. 3 years, Trey. 3 years of holidays and vacations and meeting my friends. You asked me to marry you because your brother-in-law blew millions on a failed crypto scam and your father needed a human shield to absorb the debt. Trey's jaw tightened. You are being dramatic, Renee, he muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. It is just a signature. We will pay off the loan eventually. Nothing is going to happen to you. We are family now. You have to take one for the team. I am not on your team, Trey, I replied softly. And I am certainly not going to commit federal bank fraud to fund your sister's shopping habits. Jasmine let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth in mock horror. Spencer's face was a mask of pure panic. Harrison leaned forward, planting his heavy hands flat on the table, looking like he was ready to physically force the pen into my hand. You are making a very big mistake, little girl, Harrison growled. You think you can walk away from this table without consequences. You know too much now. If you do not sign that paper, I will personally make sure you never work in the financial sector again. I will bury you in litigation until you cannot afford to buy groceries. The threat hung heavy in the air. This was the Caldwell way. If they could not manipulate you, they would destroy you. But they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. They thought my silence was fear. They thought my calm demeanor was hesitation. They did not know that my phone had just vibrated against my thigh for the third time, and I was fully prepared to burn their false empire to the ground. I let my shoulders slump forward just a fraction of an inch. I knew exactly how these people operated, and I knew that if I caused a massive scene right here at the dinner table, they would take the hidden camera footage, edit it out of context, and release it to my firm. They would paint me as an unstable, hysterical woman who had a meltdown over a simple family agreement. I needed to play their game just a little bit longer, so I reached deep down and channeled every ounce of vulnerability I could fake. I forced a slight tremble into my hands and let my breathing become shallow and erratic. I blinked rapidly, letting the bright chandelier light sting my eyes until a single convincing tear slipped down my cheek. I looked at Trey, my voice cracking perfectly. I am sorry, I whispered, wiping the tear away with the back of my hand. I am just so overwhelmed, Trey. This is all happening so fast, and I feel like everyone is yelling at me. I want to be a part of this family, but you are all scaring me. The sudden shift in my demeanor worked exactly as I intended. The tension in the room instantly morphed from aggressive hostility to smug satisfaction. Harrison leaned back in his heavy leather chair, a triumphant smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. He thought he had broken me. He thought the heavy-handed Caldwell intimidation tactics had finally cracked my working-class resolve. Vivian exchanged a knowing look with Jasmine before reaching out to pat my arm with entirely fake maternal sympathy. "Oh, sweetheart," Vivian cooed, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "No one is trying to scare you. We are just a very passionate family when it comes to our business. We just want what is best for Trey and for you. Take a deep breath. Trey let out a massive sigh of relief, rubbing his temples. He actually believed I was caving. "Thank you, baby," he said, his voice returning to that soft, manipulative tone. "Just take a second to calm down. It is going to be fine." I sniffled, keeping my eyes downcast. "I just need a minute to compose myself," I murmured softly. "Please let me just go to the restroom and wash my face. I cannot think clearly when I am crying. I will come right back and we can finish this." Harrison tapped his heavy gold watch against the table. "5 minutes, Renee," he stated firmly. "The chef is preparing the duck, and I do not want it getting cold because of a little emotional outburst. Go wash your face and come back ready to sign." I stood up from the table, my legs acting just shaky enough to sell the performance. I kept my head down as I walked out of the private dining room, stepping into the dimly lit, carpeted hallway of the country club. I could hear Jasmine snickering softly behind me as the heavy oak doors swung shut. The moment the doors clicked shut, the tremble in my hands vanished completely. My posture straightened, and the fake tears dried instantly. I walked swiftly down the quiet corridor and slipped into the lavish ladies' restroom, locking the heavy brass deadbolt behind me. I checked the corners of the room for any more hidden cameras. The ceiling was clear, the vents were empty, I was finally alone. I pulled my phone out of my purse, my hands completely steady now. The screen lit up with the third message from the unknown number. I opened the text and read the words that would ultimately seal the fate of the Caldwell family. "Do not sign anything," the message read. "Spencer is completely bankrupt. They are not just trying to secure a commercial loan. They are trying to pin a $15 million federal tax debt on you. I am Elias. I am the IT technician for Caldwell Estates. I am in the server room in the basement right now. $15 million. The number echoed in my mind, cold and absolute. This was not just a case of a failing business or a bad crypto investment. This was federal tax evasion on a massive scale. Spencer had somehow defrauded the government, and Harrison was using his vast resources to build a legal firewall around his son-in-law. They were going to use my clean federal auditing license to assume the debt, and when the Internal Revenue Service came to collect, I would be the one facing decades in a federal penitentiary. I walked over to the marble vanity and looked at myself in the massive gilded mirror. The woman staring back at me was someone Trey and his family had never actually met. They thought they had invited a timid, desperate girl to their table. They thought my lack of wealthy parents meant I had no protection. But they failed to realize that growing up with nothing teaches you how to fight for everything you have. I turned on the gold faucet and let the freezing cold water run over my wrists. I splashed a handful of water onto my face, washing away the carefully applied makeup and the last lingering traces of the woman who had loved Trey Caldwell. That woman was dead. She died the moment Trey told me to sign away my freedom to save his trust fund. I grabbed a thick linen towel and dried my face. My reflection was pale, but my eyes were different now. They were ice cold. There was no fear left in my body. There was only the calculated precision of an auditor who had just found the missing thread in a massive fraud case. All I had to do now was pull that thread until the entire Caldwell empire unraveled. I looked down at my phone and typed a quick reply to the IT technician. "I am on my way down. Do not move." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I knew I only had a few minutes before Harrison sent Trey to come looking for me. I needed to move fast. I needed evidence, and this Elias person in the basement was my only ticket to getting it. The country club bathroom was designed for luxury, not security. I quickly scanned the expensive marble space and noticed the small frosted ventilation window near the vaulted ceiling. It was narrow, but I had always been agile and I was running out of time. I kicked off my expensive heels, leaving them neatly by the porcelain sink. This would make it look like I was simply taking a long moment to breathe and wash my face if anyone came looking for me. I climbed onto the marble vanity, gripping the decorative molding along the wallpapered wall. With a sharp push, I popped the brass latch on the window and forced it open. The cool night air rushed in, hitting my face and clearing my head. I pulled myself up, squeezing my shoulders through the narrow wooden frame and dropped down into the manicured bushes outside the building. The damp soil ruined my silk stockings, but I did not care about the clothes anymore. I stayed low to the ground, using the thick shadows of the country club garden to hide my movements from the valet attendants parking cars in the distance. The text message said Elias was in the basement server room. I crept along the cold brick wall until I found the heavy metal service doors typically used by the catering and maintenance staff. One of the heavy steel doors was propped open with a folded piece of cardboard. Elias was expecting me, and he had left the path clear. I slipped inside the dimly lit service corridor. The air down here smelled like bleach and industrial floor cleaner, a sharp and bitter contrast to the expensive perfume and roasted duck upstairs in the private dining room. I followed the low humming sound of heavy machinery moving past stacks of extra banquet chairs and folded tables until I reached a solid steel door marked authorized personnel only. I did not even have to knock. The door clicked open instantly, and a young man pulled me inside, quickly shutting and locking the heavy deadbolt behind us. The server room was freezing cold, heavily air-conditioned to protect the towering racks of blinking computer equipment. Standing in the center of the cramped room was Elias. He looked to be about 24 years old, with dark, heavy circles under his eyes and a worn-out hooded sweatshirt that swallowed his thin frame. He looked terrified, as if he expected Harrison Caldwell to bust through the door at any second, but there was also a fierce spark of defiance in his posture. "You actually came?" Elias whispered, his voice shaking slightly over the noise of the cooling fans. "I was not sure if you would believe my text message." I know it sounded crazy. "I believe numbers, and I believe data," I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. "And right now I need you to show me the data, Elias. Why are you helping me? Why would you risk your job and your livelihood to warn a complete stranger about a financial crime?" Elias let out a bitter laugh and ran a shaking hand over his face. "Job," he repeated angrily. "You think this is a job, Renee. This is indentured servitude. The Caldwell family owns the apartment building where my mother and I live on the south side of the city. Harrison promised me a high-paying tech position at his real estate firm if I managed the network security for all their private events and corporate meetings. I built this entire surveillance system for them, but I have not seen a single paycheck in 3 months. When I finally gathered the courage to demand my back pay yesterday morning, Harrison laughed right in my face. He told me if I complained again, he would have my mother and me evicted onto the street by the end of the week. He said nobody would care about a poor kid from the South Side. I felt a familiar tight knot of anger form in my chest. This was exactly how Harrison and Vivian operated. They preyed on people who did not have the financial resources or the legal knowledge to fight back. They used their generational wealth as a weapon to crush anyone beneath them, and they did it with a smile. "I am so sorry, Elias," I said softly, looking him directly in the eyes. "But tonight, we are going to make sure Harrison Caldwell never threatens your family or anyone else ever again. Show me the security cameras." Elias nodded fiercely and turned to a massive bank of glowing monitors mounted on the concrete wall. He typed a quick, complex sequence across his mechanical keyboard, and the center screen flickered to life. It was a high-definition live feed of the private dining room right above our heads. I stepped closer to the screen, watching the family I had almost married. The atmosphere upstairs had completely transformed in the 5 minutes since I left the table. The heavy tension was gone, entirely replaced by arrogant and reckless celebration. Harrison had ordered a bottle of vintage champagne. A waiter was pouring the bubbling golden liquid into their crystal flutes. Vivian was laughing, throwing her head back in pure delight. Trey was leaning back in his expensive leather chair, looking completely relaxed, sipping his drink without a single trace of guilt or hesitation on his face. Elias pushed a button on the audio mixer, and the sound from the dining room flooded into our freezing basement hideout. "I cannot believe she actually started crying." Jasmine scoffed, taking a large gulp of her champagne. "She is so incredibly weak." I almost felt bad for a second, until I remembered how smug she acted about that crypto crash earlier. She really thought she was doing something. Spencer let out a loud, booming laugh that made my skin crawl. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket and leaned across the table, pointing a finger directly at Trey. I told you, Trey Spencer boasted, his voice dripping with absolute arrogance and superiority. I told you these gold-digging girls just need a little intimidation to fall in line. You apply a little pressure, you remind them how poor and insignificant they are, and they will sign anything you put in front of them. She is probably in the bathroom right now, trying to fix her cheap makeup so she can come back out here and beg us for a piece of the pie. Trey chuckled, a soft, cowardly sound that made my stomach physically turn. Yeah, well, she is going to sign the guarantor paperwork tonight, Trey said casually, as if they were discussing the weather. Once her signature is on that contract, Spencer can finally transfer the federal debt away from Apex Holdings. Then we can finally drop her. I am so tired of pretending to care about her boring accounting stories. I cannot wait to be done with this whole charade. I stood in the freezing server room watching the man I loved plot my absolute financial and legal execution. He was going to use me to absorb $15 million of federal tax fraud, and then he was going to throw me away like actual garbage. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just stared at the glowing monitor, recording their exact words and faces in my memory. The pain of the betrayal was entirely eclipsed by a cold, burning desire for total justice. I turned away from the screen and looked at Elias. He was watching me carefully, probably expecting me to break down in tears or panic. Instead, I pulled up a rolling office chair and sat directly in front of the master keyboard. Are you ready to burn their fake elite empire to the ground, Elias? I asked, my voice perfectly calm and deadly serious. Elias swallowed hard and gave a firm nod. What do you need me to do? He asked, pulling up a chair next to mine. I need root access to Spencer laptop and the Apex Holdings offshore routing numbers, I replied, cracking my knuckles. They think I am just a gold-digging girl crying in a bathroom. Let us show them exactly what a forensic accountant can do with a secure network connection and a motive. Elias slid his chair back, giving me full access to the master keyboard. I placed my hands over the keys, taking a deep breath of the freezing server room air. My fingers began to fly across the mechanical keys. I explained to Elias that forensic accounting is not just about looking at spreadsheets. It is digital archaeology. You have to understand human behavior and exactly how greedy people try to hide their sins. Spencer was a finance broker, which meant he was arrogant enough to believe his encryption was flawless, but lazy enough to use the same basic network architecture for his illegal shell companies as he did for the family legitimate real estate business. I opened a command terminal and began running a packet sniffer to identify the routing protocols Spencer used. Elias watched in stunned silence as I bypassed the primary firewall. I did not need to sit there and guess Spencer's password. I simply used the administrative backdoors Elias had already built for the building maintenance, combined with my knowledge of federal financial compliance protocols to access the raw server backups. It took me less than 4 minutes to locate the hidden partition drive on the network. It was labeled under an obscure string of alphanumeric characters designed to look like a standard system update file. I recognized the file structure immediately. I executed a decryption script I had originally written for my firm and hit enter. The screen flooded with hundreds of hidden financial ledgers. I opened the master file for Apex Holdings, and my eyes scanned the columns of data. It was exactly what I suspected. Apex Holdings was a ghost. It was a classic shell corporation. There was no payroll history, no employee tax records, no physical office leases, and no operational expenses for supplies or logistics. It was nothing but a massive digital funnel designed to move money quickly and quietly from one place to another. I traced the outgoing wire transfers, watching millions of dollars bleed out of the company into anonymous offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. But the real horror was the liability column. Spencer had taken out massive commercial loans against Apex Holdings using fabricated collateral and then intentionally defaulted. The company was a black hole of toxic debt, specifically engineered to collapse and file for bankruptcy, protecting the hidden assets offshore. But a shell company needs a source of income to look legitimate to the banks. I needed to know where the initial seed money came from before Spencer blew it all on his disastrous crypto gamble. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes darting across thousands of lines of transactional data. I followed a series of recurring deposits coming from a secondary account that had been heavily obfuscated. I ran a reverse routing trace on the account number. A new folder popped up on the screen and my blood ran absolutely cold. The title of the directory was the Sanctuary Community Initiative. I opened the internal documents and felt a wave of profound physical sickness wash over me. It was a charity fund. More specifically, it was a fake charity fund, masquerading as a community outreach program for a local network of predominantly Black churches in the city. The Caldwell family had used their status as prominent wealthy members of the community to solicit millions of dollars in donations from hardworking families, small business owners, and church congregations. They hosted gala dinners and passed collection plates, promising the money was going toward building youth community centers and providing college scholarship programs for underprivileged teenagers. Instead, every single dollar was being funneled directly into the Sanctuary Community Initiative and then quietly laundered straight into Apex Holdings. From there, Spencer took the stolen church donations and gambled them on high-risk offshore crypto derivatives, hoping to double the money and pocket the profits before anyone noticed. But the crypto market crashed and the money vanished. The Caldwell family had stolen $15 million from their own community and lost it all. I kept digging, pulling up the registration documents for the fake charity fund. I needed to see who was listed as the primary director. When the document loaded, the name printed in bold black letters made my heart stop. It was Trey, the man who had proposed to me, the man who was currently sitting upstairs drinking vintage champagne, had registered the fraudulent charity under his own name. He was the legal face of the massive financial crime. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying clarity. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation were already looking into the missing charity funds. It was only a matter of time before they traced the money from the church accounts straight to Apex Holdings. Trey was facing decades in federal prison for defrauding charities, wire fraud, and money laundering. The Caldwell family knew the federal agents were closing in. That was why they were so desperate to get me to sign that guarantor agreement tonight before the indictments came down. The document Harrison had thrown onto the dinner table was not just about assuming commercial debt for a failing business. It contained a deeply buried indemnification clause. If I signed it, I would be legally declaring myself the sole financial controller of Apex Holdings, retroactively assuming all administrative and legal responsibility for the company operations dating back to its inception. They were going to use my spotless federal auditing license to legitimize the shell company. When the authorities finally traced the stolen church money to Apex Holdings, the paper trail would point directly to me. Trey would claim he was just a naive investor who had been manipulated by his brilliant but corrupt accountant fiancé. The Caldwells would use their expensive lawyers and their political connections to paint me as the mastermind who embezzled the charity funds. I would be arrested, tried, and convicted. I would spend the rest of my life in a federal penitentiary while the Caldwell family played the victims and walked away totally free. The sheer scale of their evil was breathtaking. They were not just willing to destroy my life. They were actively destroying the lives of thousands of people in their own community who had trusted them. I stared at the glowing screen, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a deep volcanic rage. They thought I was a naive working-class girl they could use as a human shield. They had no idea they had just handed the keys to their entire criminal enterprise to a woman whose literal job was to dismantle financial terrorists. I turned to Elias, who was staring at the screen with his mouth wide open. He had read enough of the documents over my shoulder to understand exactly what his employers had done. "Elias," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I need you to connect this laptop to an external secure server. I am going to download every single byte of this data. We are going to send it all to the Internal Revenue Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and my firm chief security officer. Elias nodded his hands, flying across his own keyboard to open a secure encrypted tunnel. "You are going to burn them down," he whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "No," I replied coldly, watching the progress bar on the screen begin to fill. "I am not going to burn them down. I am going to let them burn themselves. I am going back upstairs." The download bar hit 100% with a soft digital chime. I safely ejected the external drive and slipped it securely into my pocket. I pulled out my phone and bypassed my standard contact list, opening a highly encrypted communication application designed exclusively for my forensic accounting firm. I dialed my Chief Information Security Officer, David. He answered on the very first ring. "Renee, where have you been?" David demanded, his voice tight with extreme anxiety. "I have been calling you for an entire hour. The Federal Bureau of Investigation just served a massive subpoena at our downtown headquarters. They are investigating a multi-million-dollar charity fraud ring, and your fiancé is listed as the primary suspect. The federal agents were worried you might be compromised, or worse, that you were actively helping him launder the stolen money." "I am not an accomplice, David," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the freezing temperature of the server room. "I am the lead investigator on site, and I just found the exact missing piece they need." I quickly explained the entire situation to him. I told him about the hidden camera in the floral centerpiece, the fake prenuptial agreement, and the offshore shell company named Apex Holdings. Then I told him about the Sanctuary Community Initiative and the millions of dollars stolen from the local black churches. I could hear David frantically typing on his keyboard as I spoke, communicating with the agents in his office. "The feds already have the Caldwell estate in their crosshairs right now," David said, his tone shifting from anxious to deadly serious. "They have been monitoring the offshore wire transfers for weeks, but they could not find the digital paper trail connecting the charity donations directly to Spencer brokerage accounts. They needed concrete proof of the internal routing numbers to secure the arrest warrants tonight. If you have those ledgers, Renee, you just handed them the entire case." "I am forwarding the encrypted zip file to your secure server right now," I said, pressing the send button on my phone. "Share it directly with the Internal Revenue Service Cyber Division and the lead federal agents. Tell them to hurry. The Caldwell family is currently drinking vintage champagne and waiting for me to sign my own death warrant." The file transfer initiated. I looked up from my phone screen and glanced back at the glowing security monitors mounted on the concrete wall. The atmosphere in the private dining room had shifted entirely. The 15 minutes Harrison had granted me to wash my face were officially up. Harrison was tapping his heavy gold watch and drumming his fingers impatiently against the polished mahogany table. He shot a harsh, glaring look across the table at Trey. "Go get her!" Harrison barked, his deep voice carrying clearly over the audio feed. "She has had enough time to compose herself. Bring her back here and do not take no for an answer. We are finishing this paperwork tonight." Trey stood up abruptly. The relaxed, confident posture he had displayed earlier was completely gone. He looked deeply agitated and annoyed. He nodded respectfully to his father and marched out of the dining room, stepping into the carpeted hallway. Elias switched the camera feed, tracking Trey as he moved aggressively down the corridor toward the ladies' restroom. Trey stopped outside the heavy oak door of the bathroom. "Renee," he called out, his voice dripping with that same fake concern he had used for 3 years. "Baby, are you okay in there? Come on out, we need to finish up dinner." When I did not answer, Trey dropped the loving boyfriend act entirely. He grabbed the brass handle and rattled it violently. It was locked from the inside. "Renee, open this door right now," Trey demanded, banging his heavy fists loudly against the wood. "Stop acting like a child. You are embarrassing me in front of my father. Open the door and come sign the contract." He waited a few seconds, but there was only silence from the empty bathroom. On the security monitor, I watched his face turn red with absolute frustration and growing suspicion. He let out a loud string of bitter curses and kicked the bottom of the bathroom door, leaving a scuff mark on the expensive wood. He looked around the empty hallway, his eyes narrowing as his mind tried to figure out where I had gone. Then his gaze shifted toward the far end of the corridor. He looked directly at the heavy steel door that led down to the maintenance corridors and the basement server room. He knew I was smart, and he knew I did not trust his brother-in-law Spencer. He suddenly realized I might have figured out the trap and gone looking for leverage. "She is snooping around," Trey muttered to himself, running a hand nervously through his perfectly styled hair. He turned sharply on his heel and began marching directly toward the basement stairs. Elias let out a panicked gasp, jumping up from his rolling office chair. "He is coming down here, Renee," Elias whispered frantically, grabbing my arm. "If he catches you in the server room with me, he is going to know exactly what we did. He will realize I gave you access to the network. He will kill me. Harrison will ruin my life and put my mother on the street." I looked down at my phone. The upload progress bar hit 100%. The files were successfully delivered to the federal authorities. The Caldwell family was officially out of time. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned to Elias, my expression completely calm and focused. "Nobody is going to ruin your life, Elias," I said firmly, holding his panicked gaze. "Wipe the local terminal memory right now and clear the access logs. Make it look like you were just running a routine diagnostic check on the building cooling systems. Do not say a single word to him when he walks through that door." The sound of heavy, angry footsteps echoed from the concrete stairwell just outside the server room door. Trey was moving fast, taking the stairs two at a time. His anger was radiating through the thick walls. I had exactly 10 seconds to get out of the basement before the man I used to love found me standing over his digital grave. The heavy footsteps were pounding against the concrete stairwell, echoing louder with every single second. I gave Elias one last nod and darted toward the heavy steel door. I pulled it open just wide enough to slip my body through and stepped out into the dim maintenance corridor. I did not run toward the main stairs where Trey was descending. Instead, I turned sharply to the left, moving deeper into the shadows of the basement. The air down here smelled like damp concrete and old cardboard. It was a completely different world from the polished marble and crystal chandeliers upstairs. I remembered the architectural layout of country clubs like this one. They always had a secondary servant staircase used by the catering staff to move discreetly between the kitchen and the private dining rooms. I scanned the dark hallway and found a narrow wooden door that was completely unmarked. I pushed it open and slipped inside, pulling the door shut just as I heard the heavy basement door slam open behind me. Through the thin walls, I could hear Trey barking orders at Elias. "Where is she?" Trey demanded, his voice echoing aggressively through the concrete room. "I know she came down here, you little rat." I heard Elias stuttering, playing his part perfectly. Elias claimed he had been alone the entire time running cooling system diagnostics. I did not wait to hear the rest of their conversation. I began to climb the narrow wooden steps. The air in the enclosed stairwell was stale and suffocating, but I moved as quickly as I could. My ruined silk stockings snagged on the rough wooden splinters, but I ignored the stinging pain in my feet. Every time a step creaked under my weight, I held my breath, terrified that Trey would hear the sound and come hunting for me in the dark. I had to beat him back to the main floor. I had to look completely unbothered. I pushed myself harder, letting the adrenaline fuel my burning muscles. I reached the top of the stairwell and pressed my ear against the door. I heard nothing but the faint sound of classical music playing softly through the hallway speakers. I pushed the door open and stepped out. I was standing at the far end of the carpeted hallway, just a few yards away from the ladies' restroom. I quickly smoothed down the fabric of my dress, brushing away the dust from the basement. I took a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I reached into my purse and pulled out a tube of dark red lipstick. I stepped in front of a large decorative mirror hanging on the hallway wall. I uncapped the lipstick and began carefully applying it to my lips. It felt like I was putting on war paint. I made sure my posture was relaxed and elegant. I looked like a woman who had simply taken a few extra minutes to freshen up her appearance after an emotional moment. My hands were completely steady. A heavy door slammed open at the other end of the hallway. I saw Trey emerge from the basement stairwell in the reflection of the mirror. His face was flushed with pure rage, and his fists were clenched tight at his sides. He looked frantically up and down the corridor. When his eyes finally locked onto me, leaning casually against the wall applying my makeup, he froze. He closed the distance between us in 3 massive strides. Before I could even turn around to face him, he lunged forward. He grabbed my left arm with brutal, violent force. His large hand clamped down over my bicep, and his fingers dug viciously into my skin. The sudden pain was sharp and intense. I gasped softly, dropping the lipstick tube back into my purse. I knew instantly that his grip was going to leave a deep purple bruise on my flesh. He pushed me roughly against the wall, pinning me in place. "Where the hell were you?" Trey hissed, keeping his face inches from mine. His breath felt hot and disgusting against my cheek. I was touching up my lipstick tray. I replied, keeping my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "I told you I needed a minute to compose myself." He squeezed my arm even tighter, making a sharp ache shoot down to my elbow. "Do not play games with me, Renee," he growled, while his eyes looked wide and manic. "You think you are so smart, but you have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. My family can crush you like an insect. You are nothing without me. You are just a pathetic nobody from a poor neighborhood that we took pity on. You are going to walk back into that room right now, and you are going to put your signature on that contract. If you do not sign it, I swear I will make you regret the day you were born. I will destroy your career and I will make sure you end up living on the streets." I looked up into his dark eyes. There was no trace of the charming man I had fallen in love with. He was a monster who was cornered and desperate to save his own skin. I did not struggle against his bruising grip. I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled. It was a cold, dead smile that finally made a flicker of confusion cross his angry face. "I am ready to go back and Trey," I said softly. "Lead the way." He kept his bruising grip on my arm and practically dragged me down the hallway toward the heavy oak doors of the private dining room. His jaw was clenched tight with barely contained violence. I could feel the tension vibrating through his entire body. But the moment his hand touched the brass door handle, his entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. It was genuinely terrifying to witness the psychological transition. The murderous rage vanished from his eyes entirely and was replaced by a soft, warm glow. His clenched jaw relaxed into a perfectly crafted, gentlemanly smile. He loosened his violent grip on my arm, sliding his hand down to gently interlock his fingers with mine. He pushed the doors open and guided me back into the room, looking like the absolute picture of a loving, devoted fiancé. He was putting his mask back on for the hidden camera above the floral centerpiece. We stepped back into the dining room, but this time I was the one holding the loaded weapon. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind us, sealing us back inside the private dining room. The atmosphere was thick with arrogant anticipation. Everyone at the table turned to look at us, assuming they had already won the psychological war. Trey pulled out my heavy leather chair, playing the part of the perfect gentleman. I sat down, smoothing the skirt of my dress and folding my hands neatly in my lap. I kept my face entirely neutral, a blank canvas that gave away absolutely nothing. Harrison sat at the head of the table, radiating smug satisfaction. He thought his son had successfully bullied me into submission out in the hallway. He reached across the polished mahogany table and firmly pushed the thick stack of legal documents directly in front of my plate. He then reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a heavy black Montblanc pen. He laid it carefully on top of the signature page, right next to the line where my name was printed. "We are glad you decided to be reasonable, Renee," Harrison said, his voice carrying a tone of absolute finality. "I knew you were a smart girl. Now let us finish this little piece of administrative business so we can finally enjoy our dinner and celebrate your future in this family." Vivian lifted her crystal glass of vintage champagne, taking a delicate sip, while watching me with predatory eyes. Jasmine was busy checking her reflection in the blade of her butter knife, looking completely bored by the entire interaction. Spencer was leaning back in his chair, swirling his expensive bourbon, a victorious smirk plastered across his pale face. Trey took his seat beside me, resting his hand on my thigh under the table. His fingers squeezed my leg in a silent warning, reminding me of the violent threats he had just whispered in the corridor. He was fully confident that I was terrified of him. I looked down at the heavy black pen resting on the crisp white paper. I slowly reached out and picked it up. The metal barrel felt cold and heavy in my fingers. The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. They were all waiting for the scratch of the ink against the paper, the final legal binding that would transfer their massive criminal debt onto my shoulders. The hidden camera above the floral centerpiece blinked its tiny red light, capturing every agonizing second of their supposed victory. I held the pen over the dotted line. Then, instead of signing, I casually set the pen down. It landed on the mahogany table with a sharp metallic click that echoed loudly in the silent room. Before I sign an unconditional commercial guarantor agreement, I said, my voice perfectly smooth and conversational. I just have a few minor technical questions about the cash flow structure of Apex Holdings. The victorious smirk vanished from Spencer's face. He sat up straight, his brow furrowing in confusion. Harrison let out a heavy, irritated sigh. "We do not have time for an audit right now," Renee Harrison snapped, tapping the table. "The details of the corporate structure do not concern you. You are signing a standard integration document. Do not stall." "I am afraid it does concern me, Harrison," I replied, looking directly into his cold eyes. "As a forensic accountant, I am legally obligated to understand the liabilities I am assuming. And according to my brief review of your financial architecture, Apex Holdings seems to be operating as a highly leveraged shell company. It has zero operational overhead, but it is hemorrhaging millions of dollars into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands." Spencer gripped his bourbon glass so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. "How do you know about that?" He stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher than normal. "You cannot possibly know the routing structures from reading a single page of a prenup." I ignored his panic and kept my eyes fixed on Harrison. "But what I find truly fascinating," I continued, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the table, "is the primary source of the incoming capital. Apex Holdings does not sell a product, and it does not offer a service. Yet for the past 18 months, it has received consistent massive deposits from a secondary routing account." Trey's hand tightened on my thigh, but I did not even flinch. I turned my head and looked directly at Spencer. His face was losing color rapidly, turning a sickly shade of gray. "That secondary routing account," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper, "is linked to a tax-exempt organizational fund called the Sanctuary Community Initiative." The moment those words left my mouth, the entire dining room completely froze. The silence was so absolute I could hear the faint ticking of Harrison Gold watch. Vivian lowered her champagne flute, her hand trembling slightly. Trey pulled his hand away from my leg, as if he had just touched a burning stove. I tilted my head, watching the sheer terror wash over Spencer's face. "The Sanctuary Community Initiative," I repeated, letting the name hang heavily in the air. "A charity fund created to build youth centers and provide scholarships for local Black churches. A charity fund that collected over $15 million from hardworking families in our community." Tell me, Spencer, why is $15 million of church donations being funneled directly into your corporate shell company and then immediately wired to a high-risk offshore crypto derivatives market? Spencer opened his mouth, but he could not form a single coherent word. He began to sweat profusely, heavy beads of moisture forming on his forehead and upper lip. He looked wildly at Harrison, silently begging his father-in-law for help. "I do not know what you are talking about." Spencer finally choked out, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "You are making things up. You are throwing around random financial terms to sound smart." "I am not making anything up, Spencer," I replied, my tone sharp and authoritative. "I am quoting exact transaction ledgers. I know about the wire transfer you authorized on the 12th of last month. I know about the $4 million loss you took when the Helios Digital Asset Fund collapsed yesterday morning. You stole charity money to cover your failing investments, and you lost every single penny of it." Jasmine looked back and forth between me and her husband, her perfectly contoured face twisting in confusion. "Spencer, what is she talking about?" Jasmine demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "What charity money? You told me your hedge fund was clearing record profits this quarter. You just bought me a new car." Spencer ignored his wife entirely. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors as if he was calculating his chances of running out of the country club. "You sit here and mock my job," I said, never breaking eye contact with Spencer. You call me a corporate drone and tell me I do not understand how real wealth is generated. But I understand exactly how you generate your wealth. You steal it from the people who trust you. And when your reckless gambling finally catches up with you, your brilliant plan is to find a woman with a clean federal license to take the fall for your federal tax evasion. Harrison slammed both of his hands down on the table, rattling the expensive china. Shut your mouth right now, Renee! Harrison bellowed, his face dark red with explosive fury. You have absolutely no proof of any of this. You are sitting at my table, making wild, defamatory accusations. I turned my gaze slowly to Harrison. I was no longer the timid girl they had invited to dinner. I was the executioner, and I had already pulled the lever. I do not need to make accusations, Harrison, I said softly, pointing a manicured finger up toward the ceiling. You are the ones recording this conversation. You wanted me on tape so badly. Well, now you have Spencer complete financial collapse and your family charity fraud permanently documented on your own hidden surveillance system. The hunter had officially become the hunted, and they were completely trapped in the snare they had built for me. Vivian completely lost whatever tiny shred of aristocratic composure she had left. She slammed both of her hands down on the polished mahogany wood so hard her crystal champagne flute tipped over. The expensive vintage wine spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, dripping down onto the hardwood floor like blood. She stood up her heavy wooden chair, scraping violently against the floorboards. You ungrateful little brat! Vivian shrieked, her voice entirely stripped of that fake sweet honey tone she always used to manipulate people. We brought you into this family. We gave you a seat at our exclusive table. You were nothing but a pathetic public school charity case with cheap clothes and zero social connections. We offered you a life of luxury you could only dream of, and you dare to sit here and accuse my son and my family of being criminals. You are just trying to extort us because you know you are entirely beneath us. You will never belong in our world, Renee. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical screaming. I did not need to. The person with the actual power never has to shout. I reached quietly into my leather purse and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the glowing screen, holding it casually in the palm of my hand. I am not extorting anyone, Vivian, I said, keeping my tone completely even and perfectly calm. Extortion requires me wanting something from you. I do not want your dirty money. I do not want your fake social status. And I certainly do not want your cowardly son. I just want you all to see exactly who you really are when nobody else is watching. I tapped the casting icon on my phone screen, linking it directly to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted on the far wall of the private dining room. Harrison used that specific screen for his corporate real estate presentations during important business dinners, so I knew it was connected to the local unsecured network. The massive black screen flickered to life, casting a bright, harsh glow across the darkened room. The live security feed Elias had recorded just 20 minutes ago began to play. The audio was crystal clear, amplified heavily by the expensive surround sound speakers embedded in the ceiling. Every single person at the dinner table froze. There, on the massive high-definition screen, was Spencer leaning back in his chair with his tailored suit jacket unbuttoned, looking incredibly smug and victorious. The recorded version of Spencer pointed a finger directly at Trey, holding his glass of bourbon. I told you, Trey. The recorded Spencer boasted, his voice echoing loudly and horribly through the room. I told you these gold-digging girls just need a little intimidation to fall in line. You apply a little pressure, you remind them how poor and insignificant they are, and they will sign anything you put in front of them. She is probably in the bathroom right now trying to fix her cheap makeup so she can come back out here and beg us for a piece of the pie. I watched the real Spencer sink down low into his chair, his face completely devoid of any color. He looked like he was going to be physically sick right there on his empty dinner plate. Jasmine stared at the glowing screen, her mouth hanging wide open, unable to comprehend that her supposedly genius husband had just confessed his manipulation out loud for the entire room to hear. Then the video cut to Trey. The man who had just dragged me down the hallway threatening to destroy my life was now projected 50 times his normal size on the wall. Yeah, well, she is going to sign the guarantor paperwork tonight. The recorded, Trey said casually, taking a sip of his drink. Once her signature is on that contract, Spencer can finally transfer the federal debt away from Apex Holdings. Then we can finally drop her. I am so tired of pretending to care about her boring accounting stories. I cannot wait to be done with this whole charade. The video stopped playing. The television screen faded to pitch black. The silence that descended upon the private dining room was absolute and suffocating. The elite facade of the Caldwell family did not just crack. It shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of their own eyes. There was no denying it. There was no spinning it with expensive lawyers or public relations teams. They had just watched themselves orchestrate a massive federal fraud on video. I looked at Trey. He was staring blindly at the blank television screen, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. The reality of what he had done and what was about to happen to him was finally crashing down on his perfectly styled head. He looked over at me, his dark eyes filled with a pathetic, cowardly terror. "You recorded us," Trey whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own heavy, rapid breathing. "No, Trey." I replied, my voice ringing clear in the dead silent room. "I did not record you. Your father recorded you. He installed the hidden surveillance system in this room. He ordered the cameras to be placed in the floral arrangements to trap me. I simply borrowed the footage from your own basement server. You built the gallows, and you tied the noose. I just showed you the mirror." Harrison looked like he was having a massive medical emergency. His face was a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He grabbed the thick edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white, as he struggled to process the magnitude of the disaster. His entire legacy, his massive real estate empire, his pristine reputation in the local community was all completely obliterated in the span of 3 minutes. "You stole internal data!" Harrison growled, his voice thick and shaky with rage. "That is a corporate crime. We will sue you. We will have you thrown in federal prison for corporate espionage." I laughed. It was a genuine cold laugh that made Harrison physically flinch. "Corporate espionage," I repeated slowly, shaking my head at his sheer arrogance. "Harrison, you are missing the much bigger picture here. I did not just cast that video to your television. When I was in the basement accessing your server, I also downloaded the entire Apex Holdings financial ledger. I downloaded all the offshore routing numbers. And most importantly, I downloaded the complete transaction history of the Sanctuary Community Initiative." Vivian gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. The direct mention of the fake church charity was the final nail in the coffin. She knew exactly what they had done to those innocent people in their congregation, and she knew exactly how the federal government punished charity fraud. I sent every single file to the cyber division of the Internal Revenue Service, and to my firm chief security officer, I stated clearly, ensuring every single word landed with maximum devastating impact. The Federal Bureau of Investigation currently has the entire data packet. They have the video of you plotting to dump your federal debt onto me. They have the definitive proof that Trey is the registered director of the fraudulent charity. You cannot sue me, Harrison, because you are about to lose everything you have ever owned." The room remained completely paralyzed. Jasmine started to cry, her heavy tears ruining her expensive contour makeup. She turned to Spencer, hitting him weakly on the shoulder, demanding to know if it was true. Spencer just stared straight ahead, looking completely defeated. The Caldwell family, the untouchable elite dynasty of the city, had officially collapsed. Harrison pushed his chair back so violently it tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. "Turn it off!" he roared, his chest heaving, as he pointed a trembling finger at the blank television screen. "Turn it off right now, or I swear I will smash that screen into 1,000 pieces and make you swallow the glass." He took a heavy step toward the wall, his fists clenched, looking like a cornered animal ready to tear apart anything in its path. I did not move a single muscle. "Smashing the television will not erase the digital footprint, Harrison," I said, my voice slicing through his blind rage like a surgical scalpel. "The files are already sitting on a federal server. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about your expensive electronics. They care about the $15 million your family stole from the Sanctuary Community Initiative. Harrison stopped dead in his tracks, his massive shoulders deflating as the inescapable truth finally crushed his remaining defiance. I turned my attention away from the broken patriarch and focused my gaze on Jasmine. She was still sitting at the table clutching her diamond necklace, her perfect features twisted into a mask of pure disbelief. "You sat there earlier and told me how jealous I was of your life, Jasmine," I said, leaning forward slightly. "You bragged about how your genius husband buys you a new luxury car every 6 months and takes you on extravagant vacations to St. Bart's. You thought your designer bags and your platinum credit limit made you completely untouchable. You thought you were so much better than me." Jasmine blinked rapidly, her eyes darting between me and Spencer. "I am better than you," she whispered weakly, though the arrogant conviction was completely gone from her voice. "No, Jasmine, you are completely broke," I stated flatly, watching the last bit of color drain from her perfectly contoured face. "In fact, you might want to check your email right now. Your primary American Express card was declined at 2:30 this afternoon when you tried to buy that new designer handbag." Jasmine shook her head aggressively. "That is a lie," she stammered, pulling her phone out of her expensive purse with trembling hands. "It is just a banking error. Spencer pays the balance in full every single month." "He does not pay the balance, Jasmine," I corrected her, letting the words echo in the silent room. "He drained your shared accounts this morning. He maxed out every single line of credit in your name to pay off the exorbitant interest on a loan he took from an unlicensed private lender. He went to loan sharks, Jasmine. Real dangerous people who do not care about your country club membership or your last name. They wanted their money, and Spencer handed them your entire financial future just to buy himself another week of breathing room." Jasmine stared down at her glowing phone screen. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as she read the automated alerts from her bank. Her account balances were heavily in the negative. Her credit cards were entirely frozen. The luxurious life she had spent years rubbing in my face had completely evaporated in a matter of seconds. She slowly looked up from the screen and turned her head toward her husband. Spencer held his hands up in a defensive gesture, pressing his back hard against his leather chair. "Jasmine, please," he begged, his voice cracking pathetically. "I was going to fix it. I just needed Renee to sign the paper and the bank was going to release a bridge loan. I was going to put the money right back." Jasmine let out a guttural, high-pitched scream that sounded absolutely feral. She lunged across the polished mahogany table, sending crystal glasses and expensive silverware crashing to the floor. She grabbed Spencer by his tailored silk tie and pulled him violently forward. "You ruined me!" she shrieked, her manicured nails digging deep into his pale cheeks. "You spent my money, you pathetic loser!" She dragged her acrylic nails across his face, leaving deep red scratch marks down his jawline. Spencer cried out in pain, trying to push her away, but Jasmine was completely unhinged. She slapped him hard across the face, her heavy diamond rings tearing his skin. Vivian screamed, begging them to stop embarrassing the family, but nobody was listening to her anymore. Trey jumped up from his chair, not to pull his sister away but to protect himself from the fallout. He pointed a shaking finger directly at his bleeding brother-in-law. "This is your fault," Trey yelled over the sound of Jasmine attacking her husband. "You told me the offshore accounts were untraceable. You said the charity money was a foolproof investment. You dragged me into this, you stupid, arrogant fraud." Spencer managed to shove Jasmine off of him, holding his bleeding face with both hands. He glared at Trey with pure, burning hatred. "Do not act like an innocent victim." Trey Spencer spat thick drops of blood dripping onto his crisp white collar. "You happily signed your name on the charity registration forms. You loved the praise from the church elders. You loved pretending to be a generous billionaire philanthropist for the community. You are just as guilty as I am, and you are going to federal prison right next to me." Harrison sank down into his overturned chair, ignoring the heavy wood pressing against his back, and buried his face in his hands. The powerful patriarch of the Caldwell dynasty was reduced to a broken, sobbing mess. His children were physically fighting each other like wild animals. His son-in-law was bleeding on the dining room floor. His wife was crying hysterically about what her wealthy friends at the country club would think when the news broke. I sat perfectly still watching the utter destruction of the people who had tried to destroy me. The illusion of their superiority was completely obliterated. They were not an elite family of sophisticated investors. They were a pack of desperate thieves instantly turning on each other the very second the lights came on. Vivian suddenly stopped crying. She wiped her tears away with a linen napkin and sat up straight. She looked at her husband sobbing on the floor and her daughter clawing at her own husband. Vivian realized that panic was not going to save her country club membership or her lavish lifestyle. She reached down into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a heavy leather-bound checkbook. She slammed it down onto the table, clearing a space among the broken crystal and spilled wine. "Renee, listen to me," Vivian said, her voice trembling, but attempting to project that old familiar authority. "We can fix this. You are a smart girl, and smart girls know when to take a deal. I know you do not come from money. I know you have student loans and rent to pay. I'm going to write you a check right now for $100,000. Vivian pulled a gold pen from her purse and clicked it open. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. She hovered the pen over the paper, looking up at me with desperate, calculating eyes. $100,000, Vivian repeated, leaning forward across the table. All you have to do is take this check, walk out of this country club, and delete whatever files you claim you downloaded. You can start a whole new life somewhere else. You can buy a house in a nice neighborhood and never have to worry about your bills again. Just take the money and leave my family alone." I looked at the leather-bound checkbook and then up at Vivian's perfectly manicured face. It was almost poetic how deeply she misunderstood the situation. She still believed that her wealth was a magic wand that could wave away any consequence. She still thought I was just a poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks who could be easily bought. The classical music was still playing softly from the overhead speakers, providing a bizarre and elegant soundtrack to their absolute ruin. The heavy scent of roasted duck and spilled vintage wine hung in the air, sickeningly sweet and thick. I did not reach for the checkbook. I folded my hands on the table and let out a soft sigh. "Vivian," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, "you are offering me $100,000 from a bank account that is likely going to be frozen by federal investigators before the sun comes up tomorrow. Your son-in-law just drained your daughter's credit cards to pay off violent loan sharks. Your family is $15 million in the hole. That piece of paper you are trying to sign is completely worthless." Vivian's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure spite. The polite aristocratic mother-in-law vanished completely, revealing the vicious predator underneath. She dropped the gold pen and pointed a trembling manicured finger at my face. "You listen to me, you arrogant little nothing!" Vivian hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think you hold all the cards because you found some numbers on a computer, but you do not know how the real world works. I play tennis with federal judges. I host charity galas for state senators and local politicians. I sit on the board of directors for 3 different banks in this city. If you do not take this money and walk away right now, I will dedicate the rest of my life to destroying yours." She leaned even closer, her eyes wild with desperate, furious energy. "I will make one phone call tomorrow morning and I will have your forensic accounting license permanently revoked. I will tell the licensing board that you are unstable and corrupt. I will blackball you from every financial institution on the East Coast. You will never work in a corporate office again. You will be lucky to find a job ringing up groceries at a discount supermarket. Do not test me, Renee. I will crush you." I sat there listening to her empty threats. A few hours ago, those words would have terrified me. The Caldwell family did have immense political connections, and they had ruined people for far less. But tonight was different. Tonight, their entire empire of lies was crumbling to dust, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. I let out a cold, genuine laugh. The sound cut through the heavy tension in the room, making Vivian flinch physically. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was the sound of absolute victory. "Did you really think I was down in that basement for 15 minutes just watching you all drink champagne on a security camera?" I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the ruined dining room. Did you honestly believe I went down there just to record a confession so I could come back up here and ask you for a bribe? Vivian stared at me, her mouth slightly open, unable to comprehend my complete lack of fear. The gold pen rolled off the table and hit the hardwood floor, but she did not even notice. I am a forensic auditor, Vivian, I explained, speaking slowly and clearly, so every single word sank deep into her panicked mind. I do not deal in bribes, and I do not deal in threats. I deal in hard data. When I was sitting at that server terminal, I bypassed your network security and downloaded the entire Apex Holdings financial ledger. I pulled every single offshore routing number and every single fraudulent wire transfer. But I did not stop there. I also downloaded the complete transaction history of the Sanctuary Community Initiative. Vivian's face turned the exact color of chalk. The direct mention of the church charity fund completely broke her aggressive facade. She knew the penalty for defrauding a religious charity, and she knew her country club friends would abandon her the second the news broke. You cannot threaten my career, Vivian. I continued, leaning back in my chair, feeling completely relaxed for the first time all evening. Because you are not going to be having lunch with judges or playing tennis with senators tomorrow. You are going to be sitting in a federal interrogation room. The Internal Revenue Service Cyber Division received the full money laundering ledger exactly 5 minutes ago. The Federal Bureau of Investigation already has the unencrypted files showing how your family stole from your own church congregation. The digital paper trail is already in the hands of the authorities, and there is absolutely nothing you or your political friends can do to stop it. Vivian collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest, as if she had just been physically struck by a heavy blow. Her checkbook slid off the table and fell onto the floor, landing right next to the broken crystal glass. The desperate bargain had failed. There was no money left to buy their way out and no threats left to shield them from the devastating consequences of their own greed. Trey let out a loud, agonizing groan and curled into a tight ball in his chair, finally realizing that his luxurious life was officially over. Harrison remained on the floor, sobbing into his hands, entirely broken. Jasmine and Spencer had stopped fighting and were now just staring at me with hollow, terrified eyes. I sat at the table completely untouched by their destruction, knowing that the final act of this tragedy was already in motion. Trey suddenly slid out of his heavy leather chair. He hit the polished hardwood floor with a loud, heavy thud, but he did not try to stand back up. Instead, he crawled across the space between us like a beaten animal. He reached out with trembling, sweating hands and grabbed the hem of my silk dress. His perfect, handsome face was completely ruined by tears and sheer panic. Renee, please, he begged, his voice cracking loudly in the silent room. You have to listen to me. I did not want to do any of this. It was all Spencer's idea. Spencer and my father forced me into it. He clung to the fabric of my dress like a drowning man holding onto a life raft. They told me we were just helping the church. Trey sobbed, wiping his running nose on the sleeve of his expensive tailored suit. They told me it was a legitimate tax shelter. I am not a financial guy, Renee, you know that. I do not understand routing numbers or offshore accounts. They just put papers in front of me and told me to sign them for the good of the family. I did not know they were stealing. Harrison lifted his head from his hands when he heard Trey speaking. You ungrateful little coward. Harrison rasped, his voice raw and thick with fury. I built this entire empire for you, and you throw your own father to the wolves the second you get caught. Spencer spat a small mouthful of blood onto the floor and laughed bitterly. Look at the golden boy now, Spencer mocked, holding his torn and bleeding face. He is begging the girl he called a cheap corporate drone to save his miserable life. You are absolutely pathetic, Trey. Trey did not even look at his father or his brother-in-law. He kept his eyes locked on me, his grip on my dress tightening in desperation. No, Renee, you have to help me, Trey pleaded, ignoring the chaos around him. You are a federal auditor. The investigators will listen to you. You can tell them I was manipulated. You can testify that my father and Spencer hid the real documents from me. Tell them I am innocent. We can still get married, Renee. We can go far away from here, just the two of us like we always talked about. We can start over. The audacity of his request was truly breathtaking. He genuinely believed he could still charm his way out of a massive federal indictment by pretending to love me. He thought the same manipulative tactics he had used for 3 years would still work even after his entire criminal conspiracy had been broadcast on the wall. I reached down and firmly pried his trembling fingers off my dress. I pushed his hands away and leaned forward, forcing him to look directly into my eyes so he could see exactly how empty they were. "There is no us, Trey," I said slowly, ensuring every single word cut deep into his pathetic delusion. "There never was an us. You did not fall in love with me 3 years ago. You fell in love with my spotless credit score and my federal security clearance." Trey opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off immediately. "Do not insult my intelligence by playing the naive victim, Trey." I continued, my tone dropping to a cold, clinical whisper. "I read the incorporation documents for the Sanctuary Community Initiative. I saw the secondary banking authorizations. Your father and Spencer did not just hand you a stack of papers and tell you to blindly sign them." Trey swallowed hard, his eyes darting back and forth in sheer absolute panic. "You are the registered executive director of the charity fund," I stated, laying out the facts with absolute precision. "You personally authorized over 40 different wire transfers to Apex Holdings. I saw the digital timestamps, Trey. You logged into the banking portal from your own personal computer using your own biometric authentication. You knew exactly where the money from those church collections was going. You stole from people who trusted you because you wanted to keep wearing designer suits and drinking vintage champagne." Trey slumped backward, sitting flat on the hardwood floor, completely defeated. He knew he could not argue with the digital evidence. He knew I had seen the exact depths of his corruption, and there was no lie left that could save him. "You used me, Trey," I said, looking down at the pathetic man crying on the floor. "You spent 3 years pretending to care about me just to groom me into becoming your human shield. You smiled in my face, kissed me, and asked me to marry you all, while secretly planning to let me rot in a federal penitentiary for your crimes. That is not love. That is purely sociopathic exploitation." Trey covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with heavy, loud sobs. "I do not want to go to prison," he wailed, his voice muffled and broken. "I cannot survive in a federal prison. Renee, please, I am begging you." "If you did not want to go to prison, Trey, you should not have stolen $15 million, I replied coldly. I looked around the ruined private dining room. Harrison was weeping silently in the corner, stripped of all his power. Vivian was staring blankly at the wall, completely catatonic as she realized her country club days were over forever. Spencer was bleeding on the floor, and Jasmine was sitting in her chair, trembling like a leaf. The elite Caldwell family dynasty had been entirely dismantled and exposed for the cheap, fraudulent operation it always was. I slowly stood up from my chair, picking up my leather purse from the table. I looked down at Trey one last time, feeling absolutely nothing but sweet, liberating indifference. "You made your choices, Trey," I said softly, looking down at him. "Now you get to live with them." The heavy, suffocating silence in the private dining room was suddenly shattered. It was not a voice that broke the quiet, but a piercing wail coming from outside the country club. The sound started as a distant echo and rapidly grew into a deafening scream. I turned my head toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the far wall of the room. Through the sheer silk curtains, I could see the reflection of the manicured lawns and the circular driveway. Suddenly, the dark, peaceful night was violently illuminated by bright, flashing red and blue lights. The flashing colors cut through the darkness, painting the expensive wallpaper and the broken crystal in harsh, alternating strokes of color. The police had arrived. The exclusive gated community was designed to keep the real world out, but it could not keep federal authorities from kicking the doors in. The sound of multiple heavy sirens overlapped outside, creating a chaotic and terrifying symphony. The sheer volume of the approaching vehicles rattled the expensive glass panes in their frames. Harrison snapped his head toward the windows, his eyes widening in sheer animalistic panic. The reality of the flashing lights finally broke through his shock. He realized that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was not just sending an email or issuing a subpoena tomorrow morning. They were here right now to arrest him. He looked back at me sitting calmly at the table holding my phone. His desperate mind latched onto a completely irrational thought. He believed that if he could just destroy the physical device in my hand, he could somehow stop the inevitable. He let out a raw, guttural roar that sounded nothing like the sophisticated real estate tycoon he pretended to be. "Give me that phone!" Harrison bellowed, his face contorting into a mask of pure violent rage. He pushed himself up from the floor with a sudden burst of adrenaline and lunged directly across the table at me. His large, heavy hands reached out, aiming to grab my neck and snatch the phone from my grasp. I did not even flinch. I knew he could not hurt me anymore. Before Harrison could even cross half the distance of the mahogany table, the heavy oak doors of the dining room burst open. Elias charged into the room. He had not stayed in the basement. He had followed the sound of the sirens, and he was not about to let Harrison Caldwell lay a single finger on me. Elias moved with incredible speed. He did not hesitate or show any fear toward the powerful billionaire who had threatened to make his mother homeless just a few hours ago. Elias dropped his shoulder and drove his body weight directly into Harrison's side. The impact knocked the breath out of the older man. Harrison stumbled backward, his arms flailing wildly as he tried to keep his balance. Elias did not give him a chance to recover. He dropped low and swept his leg forcefully against Harrison's calves. Harrison let out a sharp cry as his legs were kicked out from under him. The heavy patriarch of the Caldwell family hit the hardwood floor for the second time tonight, but this time it was with absolute finality. The sound of his heavy body crashing against the wood shook the floorboards beneath my feet. Elias immediately jumped on top of him, grabbing both of Harrison's wrists and pinning his arms firmly against the ground. Harrison struggled violently, thrashing his legs and cursing, but Elias held him down with the strength of a man who was finally fighting back against a lifetime of oppression. "Stay down, old man," Elias yelled, his voice echoing with fierce determination. "You are not hurting anyone ever again." Harrison gasped for air, his face pressed hard against the floor right next to the spilled wine and the discarded guarantor contract. He glared up at Elias, his eyes filled with venom, but he lacked the physical strength to break free. He was completely immobilized, trapped under the weight of the employee he had spent months exploiting and abusing. Vivian screamed again, covering her face with her hands, unable to watch her husband being pinned to the floor by the IT technician they had treated like absolute garbage. Jasmine backed away into the corner of the room, pulling her knees to her chest, completely paralyzed by the violence and the deafening sound of the sirens outside. She clamped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut as the blue and red lights washed over her trembling body. Trey remained curled in a ball on the floor, completely ignoring his father's struggle. He was too consumed by his own pathetic fear of prison to even attempt to help his family. He just kept his face buried in the carpet, weeping like a terrified child. I stood up slowly and walked around the broken table. I stopped right in front of Harrison, looking down at him struggling beneath Elias. The red and blue police lights flashed across his sweating face, highlighting the absolute terror in his eyes. "I told you, Harrison," I said, my voice perfectly calm over the sound of the blaring sirens. "I am not a Caldwell, and I do not fall in line." Heavy, organized footsteps began echoing down the carpeted hallway outside the dining room. The federal authorities were inside the building, and they were moving fast. The age of the Caldwell Empire was officially over. The heavy double doors of the private dining room did not just open, they exploded inward with terrifying force. A squad of federal agents wearing dark tactical gear and heavy body armor flooded into the room, instantly shattering the delicate illusion of elite country club peace. The contrast between their militarized presence and the delicate crystal chandeliers hanging above was incredibly jarring. They moved with absolute precision, shouting clear, commanding orders that completely drowned out the soft, classical music still playing from the ceiling speakers. "Get on the ground! Show me your hands!" The lead agent bellowed, his voice carrying the weight of absolute legal authority. Harrison was already on the floor, pinned securely beneath Elias, but an agent quickly moved in, pulling Elias back and roughly hauling Harrison up by his expensive suit collar. The patriarch of the Caldwell family looked completely disoriented, his face pale and bruised from hitting the hardwood. The agent slammed Harrison against the mahogany table, forcing his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoed like a final judge gavel. Jasmine let out a high-pitched, terrified shriek and threw her hands over her head, curling tighter into the corner of the room. She was shaking so violently her diamond necklace rattled against her collarbone. Trey did not even try to run or defend himself. He simply laid flat on the carpet, spreading his arms out and sobbing uncontrollably, while an agent kneeled on his back to secure his wrists. He kept crying out that he was sorry, and that he was just doing what his father told him to do, entirely abandoning any remaining shred of family loyalty. But Spencer was not willing to surrender so easily. The arrogant finance broker who had just drained his wife accounts to pay off violent loan sharks knew exactly what kind of federal sentence awaited him. As two agents moved toward his side of the room, Spencer panicked. His eyes darted frantically, taking in the armed officers and the blocked exit. In a desperate adrenaline-fueled move, he grabbed a heavy wooden dining chair and hurled it directly at the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The thick glass shattered with an explosive crash, sending thousands of glittering shards raining down onto the outdoor patio. Spencer did not hesitate. He dove headfirst through the jagged opening, his tailored suit snagging on the broken glass and tearing open. He hit the outdoor stone patio hard, but scrambled immediately to his feet, sprinting blindly out onto the sprawling manicured lawn of the country club. He did not make it very far. The federal agents had completely surrounded the perimeter of the building long before they breached the dining room doors. As Spencer sprinted desperately across the wet, perfectly trimmed grass, his leather dress shoes slipped. A massive federal agent emerged from the shadows of the garden, moving with terrifying speed. The agent launched himself forward, wrapping his thick arms around Spencer's waist and executing a flawless, brutal tackle. Spencer hit the ground face first. The heavy impact knocked the wind out of him entirely. I watched through the shattered window as his face smashed into the wet dirt, completely ruining his arrogant features. The agent planted a heavy tactical boot squarely in the middle of Spencer, backpinning him firmly to the muddy grass. Spencer let out a pathetic, wheezing gasp as his arms were wrenched behind him and the handcuffs locked tightly into place. The supposed financial genius, the man who had mocked my career and called me a corporate drone, was now quite literally eating dirt in his ruined designer suit. Back inside the dining room, the chaos was reaching its absolute peak. Vivian Caldwell had finally snapped out of her catatonic shock. When an agent approached her holding a pair of handcuffs, she completely lost her mind. The sophisticated aristocratic mask she wore so proudly dissolved into pure feral hysteria. "Do not touch me!" Vivian screamed violently, slapping the agent hands away. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am Vivian Caldwell. My family practically built this city. You cannot do this to me. I play golf with the mayor. I have the police commissioner's personal cell phone number on speed dial. I will have your badge for this. I will fire every single one of you." The federal agent did not even blink. He had probably heard the exact same empty threats from 100 different corrupt billionaires. He grabbed Vivian by her arms, spinning her around with forceful clinical efficiency. Vivian fought back, thrashing her body from side to side and kicking her expensive high heels against the agent's shins. "Get your filthy hands off my clothes!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking with pure absolute despair. "I am a Caldwell. We do not go to prison. I demand to speak to a judge right now. You are ruining my dress. Let me go." Her desperate screams bounced off the high vaulted ceilings of the dining room, but nobody cared. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists sounded louder than her hysterical shouting. The reality of her situation finally hit her. All the money in the world, all the country club memberships, and all the political connections could not save her from the hard, cold steel wrapped around her wrists. She collapsed to her knees, weeping loudly, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-streaked face in a messy, tangled ruin. I stood quietly in the center of the room, observing the total devastation. I had not moved from my spot. A female federal agent approached me holding up a small digital tablet with my secure firm credentials glowing on the screen. "Are you, Renee?" The agent asked, her voice calm and respectful, cutting through the noise of the arrests. "I am," I replied simply. The agent gave me a short professional nod. "Your chief security officer sent us the decrypted files. You did incredible work tonight. We have been trying to build a solid case against this family for 6 months, and you just handed us the entire kingdom on a silver platter. Are you injured? Do you need a paramedic?" I looked down at the dark purple bruise forming on my arm where Trey had grabbed me in the hallway. I touched it lightly, feeling a dull ache, but it was nothing compared to the absolute lightness I felt in my chest. "No, I am perfectly fine," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I just want to go home." The agent smiled and motioned toward the shattered doors. "We will need your official statement tomorrow morning, but for now, you are free to leave. My partner will escort you out so you do not have to deal with the local press. They are already swarming the front gates." I nodded, picking up my purse. I looked around the room one final time, taking in the sight of the elite Caldwell family. They were all in handcuffs. They were stripped of their dignity, their wealth, and their freedom. The trap they had carefully laid for me had become their own permanent prison. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit, ready to step out into the cool night air. I walked slowly through the wreckage of the private dining room. The thick soles of my shoes crunched against the shattered crystal and broken porcelain scattered across the hardwood floor. Federal agents were moving methodically through the space, bagging up the fraudulent guarantor contract and photographing the spilled vintage wine. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the Caldwell family had been entirely replaced by the sterile, clinical efficiency of a federal crime scene. I stepped through the heavy oak doors and into the long, carpeted hallway of the country club. The corridor was crowded with uniformed police officers and country club staff who were standing against the walls staring in absolute shock as the city's most prominent family was dismantled in real time. I saw Harrison being escorted out first. He was no longer fighting. His massive shoulders were slumped, and he kept his head bowed, entirely broken by the weight of his own hubris. Vivian followed closely behind him, flanked by two female officers. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her mascara running down her face in thick dark streaks, completely ignoring the whispers of the waitstaff she had spent years treating like garbage. Jasmine and Spencer were marched out together, separated by several armed guards to prevent them from attacking each other again. And then I saw Trey. Two tall federal agents were guiding him down the hallway, gripping his upper arms tightly to keep him moving forward. The perfect golden boy of the Caldwell real estate empire looked like a hollow, empty shell. His expensive tailored suit was wrinkled and stained with dirt from crawling on the floor. His perfectly styled hair hung in his face, and his wrists were secured tightly behind his back in heavy steel handcuffs. As the agents marched him closer toward the main exit, he lifted his head and saw me standing in the middle of the corridor waiting for him. Trey dragged his feet, trying to slow down his forced march. He looked at me with those dark brown eyes that I used to trust completely. There was a pathetic, desperate glimmer of hope in his gaze. He really thought that after everything I had just exposed, I might still feel a shred of pity for him. He opened his mouth, his lips trembling, probably preparing to whisper one final manipulation or beg me to call a defense attorney on his behalf. I did not let him speak. I raised my left hand and looked down at the massive glittering stone resting on my ring finger. Trey had given me this ring 6 months ago. He had orchestrated a lavish theatrical proposal on a private balcony overlooking the city skyline. He had hired a string quartet and ordered expensive champagne, making sure there was an audience to witness his incredible generosity. When he slipped the heavy ring onto my finger, he had looked deep into my eyes and told me it was a rare, flawless diamond, imported from a private dealer in Antwerp. He had spun a beautiful romantic lie about how the enormous stone represented his priceless, eternal commitment to our future together. But forensic accountants do not trust beautiful presentations. We verify the underlying assets. I remembered walking into an independent jewelry shop downtown just last Tuesday. I had already suspected that Spencer was mismanaging the family money, and I wanted to know exactly how deep the financial rot had spread. I handed the ring to an elderly appraiser and watched through the glass counter as he examined the stone under his magnifying loupe. It took him less than 10 seconds to let out a disappointed sigh and lower his equipment. He looked at me with genuine pity and explained that it was not a rare diamond. It was not even a high-quality synthetic stone. It was a cheap mass-produced piece of moissanite set in a flimsy band of plated white gold. The entire piece of jewelry was worth less than $300. It was the perfect physical manifestation of the Caldwell family, shiny and impressive from a distance, but completely worthless the second you placed it under genuine scrutiny. I had kept the ring on my finger, playing the part of the naive fiancé until the trap was fully set. Now the performance was officially over. I reached over with my right hand and grasped the heavy fake stone. I twisted the metal band, pulling it smoothly over my knuckle. The ring slid off my finger easily, leaving behind a faint, pale indentation on my skin. It felt incredibly liberating to remove the physical symbol of my captivity. I took a single step forward, blocking Trey's path down the hallway. The federal agents paused for a brief second, allowing me to stand face to face with the man who had tried to destroy my life. Trey looked down at the ring resting in the palm of my hand. He swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously in his throat as the last remaining illusion of his wealth was brought out into the light. "I had this appraised last week, Trey," I said, my voice steady, cold, and perfectly audible in the crowded hallway. "The jeweler told me the truth. It is cheap moissanite, Trey, just as fake as this entire elite family." Trey flinched, as if I had physically struck him across the face. The final shred of his masculine pride, his illusion of being a wealthy, sophisticated provider, was entirely shattered right in front of the federal agents and the country club staff. He closed his eyes, unable to look at me or the fake piece of jewelry he had used to buy my loyalty. I did not hand the ring back to him. I did not place it gently into his pocket. I simply turned my hand over and opened my fingers. The cheap metal band dropped from my hand. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull, hollow clinking sound that echoed through the quiet corridor. It bounced twice before rolling away and coming to a rest against the scuffed baseboard of the wall, entirely discarded and forgotten like a piece of common trash. Trey let out a soft, pathetic whimper, lowering his head in absolute shame. The federal agents gave him a firm push forward, marching him past me and down the corridor toward the flashing red and blue lights waiting outside the double doors. I watched his slumped shoulders disappear around the corner, stepping out into the cold reality of his new life in the criminal justice system. I took a deep breath, letting the clean air fill my lungs, and continued my walk toward the exit, leaving the remnants of the Caldwell dynasty entirely behind me. It has been exactly 1 year since I walked out of those heavy country club doors and stepped into the cool night air. The transition from that chaotic evening to where I am sitting right now was not easy, but it was entirely worth every single struggle. I am looking out over the downtown skyline from the top floor of a commercial high-rise building. The gold lettering on the frosted glass door of my massive corner office reads, "Renee, Independent Forensic Accounting and Corporate Investigations." I did not just keep my federal auditing license. I built my own firm from the ground up using my own honest money and my own hard work. The door to my office swung open, and Elias walked in, carrying 2 cups of artisan coffee. He looked completely different from the terrified, exhausted young man I met in the freezing basement server room a year ago. Today, Elias wore a sharp, tailored suit, his posture straight and incredibly confident. When I opened my firm, I knew exactly who I wanted, running my digital security network. Elias is now my head of information technology, earning a 6-figure salary and moving his mother into a beautiful, safe home in the suburbs. We looked at each other and shared a quiet, genuine smile of mutual understanding. We had both survived the Caldwell family, and we had both come out incredibly strong. Elias walked over to the smart television mounted on my office wall and tapped his digital tablet to turn it on. "You are going to want to see this, Renee," he said, handing me my warm coffee. The morning news broadcast filled the large screen. The local anchor was standing outside the federal courthouse downtown. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, Caldwell Real Estate Dynasty, completely liquidated as executives face sentencing. I took a slow sip of my coffee and watched the final act of their destruction play out on live television. The federal judge had shown absolutely no mercy to the men who tried to steal from their own community. Spencer was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for massive tax evasion, wire fraud, and embezzling from a religious charity. He looked pale and gaunt as he was led out of the courthouse in handcuffs, his arrogant finance broker persona completely erased forever. Trey had tried to take a plea deal by testifying against his own father and brother-in-law, but his signature was on way too many fraudulent documents. He received an 8-year federal prison sentence. Harrison and Vivian did not go to prison, but they received a punishment that was arguably much worse for people who were so obsessed with their social status and fake wealth. The Internal Revenue Service seized every single asset they owned to pay back the stolen $15 million and the massive government fines. Caldwell Estates was completely dissolved. The sprawling mansion, the luxury cars, the offshore accounts, and the exclusive country club memberships were all auctioned off to the highest bidder. The news broadcast showed a brief video clip of Vivian and Harrison walking out of a modest, cramped apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. Vivian was wearing plain, cheap clothes, her hair completely unstyled, looking away from the cameras in absolute burning shame. Jasmine had filed for divorce the day after the arrests and moved into a small rental house, desperately trying to sell her designer handbags online just to pay for her groceries. The elite empire they used to terrorize the working class was entirely gone. Elias turned off the television and the large office fell into a peaceful quiet. "We did it," he said softly. I nodded, looking down at my left hand where that cheap fake engagement ring used to sit. "We did it, Elias," I replied. Looking back on that incredibly dark night, I realized something profoundly important about life and relationships. There are families and people in this world who will build a glamorous, glittering facade, specifically to hide their own toxic decay. They will try to make you feel small, insignificant, and paranoid, just to keep you under their emotional and financial control. They will demand your absolute loyalty while secretly planning your complete destruction. If I had ignored my gut instinct that night at the dinner table, if I had let Vivian gaslight me into believing I was just a paranoid, ungrateful girl, I would be sitting in a federal prison cell right now taking the fall for their massive greed. I had to choose between being polite and being free. I chose freedom, and it was the best decision I ever made in my entire life. You must never shrink yourself to fit into a toxic family false narrative. You must never let anyone convince you that your hard work, your education, or your intuition are worthless just because you do not have their generational wealth or their fake social status. Trust your instincts entirely. Own your worth, and refuse to let anyone use you as a stepping stone for their own selfish desires. Sometimes the universe forces you to walk away from the table you thought you wanted a seat at so you can go and build your own empire. I built my empire on the solid foundation of truth, independence, and absolute self-respect. I want to ask all of you watching a very important question. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship or a manipulative family dynamic to protect your own peace? Have you ever realized that someone who claimed to love you was actually just trying to exploit your kindness? I would love to read your stories and experiences in the comments below. We all draw incredible strength from hearing how others survived and thrived after a devastating betrayal. If my journey resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more authentic stories of resilience, survival, and ultimate justice. Share this video with anyone who might need a gentle reminder to trust their gut and stand up for their own worth. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that your greatest power will always be your absolute independence.